Hello, my name is Megan Mundy. Thank you for logging in to view my presentation. I will be covering my summative research presentation that I conducted during my TPTE 595 course for the summer of 2022 with Dr. McTavish. So we're going to jump right in and talk about how I spent my time this summer for this course. So the first thing that we did is we developed a timeline and a progression of my research process throughout the semester. The first thing that I did for weeks 1 and 2 was I read dissertations. That's something I hadn't done before. And then on week 3, I provided definition of terms from those dissertations that I had not heard before or were confused by prior to my reading. Then in weeks 4 and 5, I started brainstorming topics and narrowing them down. I had really big ideas and then trying to cultivate those into something more manageable and what I was truly passionate about, interested in. Through that process, I summarized into 2 topics. So for topic number 1, I spent weeks 6 and 7 gathering articles, pulling abstracts, and summarizing the main points of the research as needed. And same thing with the second topic. So just kind of scratching the surface of these 2 topics to see where my interest really stands and just to have some background knowledge on both of these things. So let's talk about weeks 1 through 3. So what I did with this is during my readings, I kind of picked apart the anatomy of a dissertation. And this was incredibly helpful, and it was an extremely productive use of my time. It allowed me to define terms that were initially very mysterious to me, which you can see I listed here. And it really allowed me to take time to envision how that would look for my own research moving forward. This is a brand new concept for me. No one in my family has a doctorate degree on either side that I'm aware of. So this is new. And I really hadn't sat down and read a dissertation before. All I really knew was it was long and that it, was a culmination of your research on a specific topic, which was true. But terms I was unfamiliar with were things like statement of the problem, really making your research concise and using effective and efficient language here was incredibly important across all the dissertations that I read, as well as the purpose of the study. Why are you conducting this research? And then the assumptions, limitations, and delimitations, that was new for me as well, about this topic, and just really digging into the meat of what you're looking at with your research. And then moving forward, looking at the data that you're collecting. Is it reliable? Is it valid? That's something I had never considered before. So that was really interesting to consider, and how that will work in my own body of work, as well as the impacts of your study. How is this going to positively impact the field? And then what does that look like for the future of this research? What are the gaps? Where do we need more research? Where do we need more data in this area to improve this topic or this issue? So this was incredibly beneficial use of my time and really helped me have a good perspective moving forward about what I was interested in and what I thought would be feasible based on my background. So from there, I started brainstorming a list of topics. So many topics, so little time. So I typed out in a Google document everything I could possibly think of that I was interested in. I mean, just all the things. And it was a long and repetitive document. But I kept coming back to 2 main themes: digital literacy and classroom management. The questions that I was asking, the topics I was looking at, seemed to come back over and over to these 2 things. So through that process, I determined that the winners were digital literacy and classroom management. Those were the 2 things I wanted to spend my time looking at. So for topic number 1, that was digital literacy, and topic number 2, classroom management. So let's jump into digital literacy. All right. Now this topic was, a monolith of a topic. I barely scratched the surface of this one, everybody. I really had no idea. I thought it was more of a niche area of research. I was wrong. So here's some of the things that I found through my reading. I found that digital literacy has various definitions depending on the researcher. There's a lot of debate in the field about an accurate working reflection of digital literacy, and I thought that was fascinating. I had no idea. There is a gap in instruction on the grade school level. Seems like what I've read found that there's always a need for digital literacy and a need to how they can actually implement that in the classroom. In terms of teacher preparation programs, there was a need to include more digital literacy instruction from what I read and what I've seen. And then, of course, schools struggle to effectively integrate digital literacy instruction into the curriculum, especially for English language arts. So we're going to dig a little bit more into each of these topics. I've pulled some quotes from the research, not from everything because that would take a million years, or at least it feels like a million years. And so I've just pulled some highlights and things that really stood out to me from my reading and what I've learned so far. So first, this is from Keller and Share, and it says literacy involves gaining the skills and knowledge to read, interpret, and produce certain types of text and artifacts, and to gain the intellectual tools and capacities to fully participate in one's culture and society. Now, this article is focused on critical media literacy, which is a whole different thing, and then I'm not going to dive into, but I thought this was a really succinct, very excellent definition of digital or the action of literacy. And there's a lot of debate there. In one of the research articles I read, they talked about how digital literacy is currently evolving, which is really difficult for people to nail down, which is why there's so many working definitions of it. Then some researchers have gone really in depth and narrowed down, like, here are the 8 elements of digital literacy. So that was very interesting to read about. But I mean, I think if this is a topic that I'm using moving forward, I really have to define what that looks like. And also in this article, it was another great quote. It says, to the domains of reading, writing, and traditional print literacies, one could argue that in an era of technological revolution, educators must develop robust forms of media literacy, computer literacy, and multimedia literacies, thus cultivating multiple literacies in the restructuring of education. Now, that is a huge undertaking, right? That's a gigantic undertaking, especially if you're just narrowing that to English language arts teachers. So there, is that gap that's there, I think, in instruction based on what I've read. And we really need to fill that in to meet the needs of our students and prepare them to be successful, which is the ultimate goal of what we try to do in the classroom. And then, in addition, teacher preparation programs need to address that. What does that look like in the classroom? And, there's a lot of theory about digital literacy, and I think theory is great, and I'll talk a little bit more about that struggle between theory and methodology in teacher preparation programs. But I think it's really valuable that is incorporated into the curriculum because you're seeing how much we're moving into a digital age. I mean, we're already there. Let's be real. We're already there. But how that impacts all aspects of the classroom. And I'll talk about that with classroom management, but definitely with literacy. So let's look at this next one here. So digital literacy is necessary and vital to student success moving forward after the COVID-19 pandemic. And then this study that I looked at by Ladato and Punzalan reveals a need for more development of digitally integrated curriculum for students. So just again, speaking to the need that we're seeing here of this curriculum, the need that we need to prepare our students and how teacher preparation programs need to address that, which is really fascinating to me. And then, of course, this is from the Frau Meggs, Shalat and Hochman and Ponce research done in 2020. And what they did is they created the Handbook of Media Education Research. It is a full book. Now, I did not read the whole book. I read excerpts because, 400 or 500 pages. But I thought that was such a valuable resource and wanted to mention it because it really breaks down all the things that we're seeing in media education. It was published in 2020, so it's fairly recent. I mean, it's not, in the past 2 years, but it's really taking into impact a lot of different forms of technology that we're seeing. So They say it's not easy for education systems and policy development processes to keep pace with changes in digital media or research about it. Again, echoing what I said earlier, that we are really struggling to find a succinct definition. And then, regardless of whether young people's experiences are considered to be benign or problematic, though, the more significant point is that examples may not be making their way into media classrooms. For this reason, if media education is to remain relevant and essential for young people, there will need to be a sustained and interconnected relationship between research in the digital media field and the design of school-based learning experiences. So there's a chapter in the book that talks about not only the definitions of digital literacy, but this idea of macro digital literacy and micro digital literacy, which was, astounding to me. So macro, you're looking at the big picture, right? How do we communicate through devices? How do we communicate through email? Those bigger picture. How do we communicate through presentations like this one? But then macro is looking at smaller ways that students and young people are communicating in these niche environments, and how that is digital literacy. And they really go into some fascinating aspects, like comments on fandom of YouTube content creators. Like, that is a form of digital literacy, how you comment on a video that you've watched. Fascinating. Had never considered pulling that in as a resource, especially in the English language arts department. Like, how cool would that be to pull in examples of comments on a fandom account and be like, this is communicating. What's the intended audience, right? Breaking that apart, looking at the language, looking at the terminology. Fascinating stuff to really look at there. And saying, like, some people may say that's problematic or whatever, that's not a valid form of literacy, but it is, right? Language is everywhere, and our students are talking and communicating in these platforms, and we as educators need to be in line with that. So I loved this excerpt, and I really want to read the whole book. That's on my to-do list. It was fascinating. So if you have a chance, I would suggest looking at this book, and I think it just really makes a lot of interesting arguments for that micro digital literacy terminology and its application in the classroom, and how that's a valid form of instruction. It's just fascinating. So from there, just so you can get an idea, let's kind of look over some of the references, and these are the things that I read. I looked at COVID-19 and how that's impacting digital literacy, and there's even we had to move, from in-person to virtual rapidly, and how that's impacting literacy. That was really interesting. We looked at, like I said, the handbook, and then I looked at, digital literacy, how they're being prepared in high school, and then writing instruction during the pandemic, and digital citizenship. That's a whole element of digital literacy as well. So that's fascinating. I didn't dig too deep into that because I feel like digital citizenship is its own topic, but it is connected to digital literacy, of course. And then, of course, critical media literacy as well. There are U.S. media literacy organizations, which I thought was fascinating. I didn't know those existed. So there's ACME, that's the Action Coalition for Media Education, and that's a national media literacy organization. So that's interesting. And then there's AMLA, which is the Alliance for Media Literate America, and that's also a national media agency organization. And they provide a lot of research and resources that people can dig into. So I just wanted to mention those. And I think there are several others, but those were the two main ones that popped up in my readings quite often. Okay, so where do we go from here with digital literacy? Here are some questions that I have moving forward. So what is the best working definition of digital literacy for research purposes? How are grade schools integrating technology in terms of digital literacy? Are teacher preparation programs integrating digital literacy into the curriculum? If so, how is it effective? And how do ELA programs address issues of digital literacy when it's included in the state standards, right? So if you look at the state standards for Tennessee and Alabama where I taught, digital literacy is a component of it, but how is that really manifesting itself in the classroom and in instruction? So those are some good questions to ask, and maybe I'll dig into those later if those are where my research heads based on my coursework. All right, let's talk about classroom management. Woo woo. Okay, now this topic, I found that I could talk about this for days. I mean, classroom management is what keeps me up at night. Okay, so I'm very passionate about this, and so it's why I wanted to dig into that a little bit more this summer. So here are some summaries of the things I found. So classroom management is connected to teacher retention. That just appeared over and over and over again in what I read. There is a gap in addressing technology in connection to classroom management. How are we managing devices in our classroom impacts classroom management. Then I also found there are advances in virtual simulation scenarios for teacher preparation programs. That was fascinating, and we'll dig into that in a second. And then classroom management has been impacted by COVID-19 and what that looks like moving forward after this in this post-pandemic era, if we are there. So let's look at this. So this is from the Darling Hammond research, and it says, despite longstanding criticisms of teacher education, the weight of substantial evidence indicates that teachers who have had more preparation for teaching are more confident and successful with students than those who have had little or none. I mean, we know that, right? But I would argue, in addition to this and the research that this whole article talks about how teacher education matters, that classroom management is a portion of it, right? And I'm really interested in how teacher preparation programs are addressing this. Are they? Is it effective? What do first year teachers think? What do pre-service teachers think? Especially in terms of technology, I think that is new-ish, right? And looking at this, it really points to the power of classroom management in teacher prep programs and how valuable that experience is in the classroom before you start your first year of teaching. So, and this is from another article where they found in recent years, universities have launched programs to create simulations with virtual reality to provide future teachers with the opportunity to practice strategies in the virtual setting. For example, Teach Live is a mixed reality simulated classroom technology has been used in initial teacher education programs to provide repeatable experiential learning opportunities for students. So for this, I started looking at, well, if teacher preparation programs are addressing classroom management, how are they doing that? And they're doing that through simulation. What? Yeah, through virtual reality. Isn't that wild? So Teach Live is in UCF's program. Dr. Kenna actually had experience with this with Teach Live. I don't know if it's still operational at this moment, but they really piloted this program and dispersed it throughout the country, throughout the world. It's really an interesting concept. And essentially how it works is you have someone that's like controlling how the virtual students are responding to a live teacher in those instances. It's wild. And not only is there Teach Live, there are applications of this, like I think there's one in Germany that's becoming even more advanced and developed. So it's really, kind of a crazy idea. So this is an example of a simulation that you would see in the Teach Live at UCF and other institutions across the country. So they have these, simulated students that are interacting with you virtually, and someone's controlling that. A person is controlling, how those students are reacting to what the teacher is saying and how they're interacting and moving around the room and things of that nature. So I just thought that was fascinating. And, I've always said that simulation should be a part of classroom management training. But I have my own ideas about that, and it does not involve virtual reality, which is super expensive to plan and produce. But I wanted to share that because I saw that and I was like, that is amazing. What a time to be alive. Okay. So then I started to dig in, how is the pandemic impacting classroom management, teacher retention, that side of things? And so this is from a recent study that was just conducted in 2021. And it says studies show that teachers are working more hours than before the pandemic and facing challenges with lower student attendance, lower engagement in online lessons, and difficulties with students' access to technology. And I really think that's burnout, right, from the pandemic and being forced into this virtual platform. In addition, they found the present findings suggest that teacher confidence in the abilities to manage student behavior and to engage students in learning predicted positive adjustment to the pandemic circumstances. So I was like, oh, well, that's good. Moreover, teachers who have worked in settings where school leaders provided a collegial and just and fair school environment prior to the pandemic also fared better after the pandemic onset. Well, I'm glad the research supports the obvious and even your research, Dr. McTavish. So that's exciting. Some update on your dissertation there. But, I think that's true of regardless of the pandemic, right? If you have school leaders that are providing a fair and just school environment, then that is a huge portion of the struggle that teachers face. So, like I said, I could talk about classroom management for a million years, and the simulation portion is very fascinating to me as well. I think there's a way that you can scale that down, but we'll talk about that in a second. So here's some of the things that I read, how teacher education matters, mixed reality learning environments, kind of looking specifically at the technology portion of classroom management. We also looked at digital solutions in educator training, of what does effective classroom management look like, all of these different things. Teacher prep review, lots and lots and lots of resources that I tried to look at because this can be a very broad topic. But for me, I'm really interested on the teacher side. Oftentimes, classroom management is focused student side. What are we doing for students? How are we managing students? What does that look like for teachers? That's really where I want to narrow my focus a little bit. Okay, so questions to consider moving forward. So, is classroom management addressed in teacher preparation programs? If so, how is it being addressed? Is it effective? What are the gaps in the class connection between technology in the classroom and classroom management? What is the role of simulation? Can it be scaled down to a more cost-effective implementation? I say yes, and I have an idea. If you want to hear more about that, because this presentation is getting long, let me know. I have my whole idea. Dr. Kenna knows. I wrote a paper about it. I'm very excited. Hopefully, I can have someone let me utilize it in their classroom at some point. So, how is COVID-19 impacting classroom management and classroom environment? So, all of those things are questions that I want to dig deeper into, what I'm very passionate about, and I think is maybe the direction that I'm headed, but we'll see. Okay, so where do I go from here? Upward and onward. I learned so much over a very short amount of time. I feel that I finally had the opportunity to really sit with all of my interests and narrow them down to something that was far less overwhelming. In addition, I feel confident on how I wanted to progress through my coursework and select courses that would benefit my research moving forward. So pulling out, some of the things that I've talked about and really digging into those through my coursework. So, where are some places that I need some support? How to collect data, opportunities for collection of data, formulation of research questions. I don't know about that. I'm going to need some support there. Methodology versus theory. One of the driving things that I'm really interested in is focusing on the value of methodology, and what I'm seeing a lot in research is an emphasis on the theory, which I think is fantastic because it's multiple use. But what about method? I think that that's important too. And then navigating committee members for a smooth process moving forward, because I'm still meeting people and seeing how they interact and how they would best work together on my committee when I get to that point. So those are some places that I could see that I would need some support moving forward. But overall, I have really enjoyed this process. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It has been incredibly beneficial for me to just have the space and the time to really dig into these topics that I'm really passionate about. It's going to be hard to decide moving forward, but that's okay. We've got some time, right? We have a little bit of time. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your encouragement, and go Vols and Lady Vols.